has a monopoly on the truth. Our version of our own truths are based on our own lived experiences. In this space, we welcome different perspectives to learn, unlearn, and enlighten. Welcome to The Lantern. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Lantern podcast. I'm so excited to be joined by Bontle Moka on today's episode, who is the founder of Endometriosis ZA. Bontle, welcome to the Lantern podcast.
Thank you, Khanyi. I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Okay, so as a departure point, I want to ask you, what does mental health and the intersection of women's health mean to you?
That is a good question. So mental health to me the best way I would say is just being in a good space in your mind, overall well-being, because I think that various things can impact your health and the intersection of women's health. That is a big one. That is a broad one. I think
You're like, don't
I
get me started.
don't get me started, but I I don't know. I look at it as using words like being seen, inclusivity, um, being listened to, access, availability, all of those different things, because I think we can cover so much in there. So I think we'll start there. Um, yeah, for me, that's where I'll kind of keep it before I just fully dive into anything.
One thing I really love is that your definition of women's health is so broad, and the fact that you've understood it cannot be reduced to one thing. And I love the fact that you spoke about the visibility, like being heard, being seen. But why do you think those things matter to you, and why do you think they're relevant to women's health?
So I think it matters to me because on the other side of it, we are ignored, dismissed, gaslit often, and therefore have less access to the things that will support us in our physical well being, mental well being, and it adds to the cycle of what we then continue to struggle with. So if we're not seen, heard, you know, given the space to be, to heal, to pursue the things we want to, there's just a cycle that continues. You know what I mean? Like I just think we have to look at the other side of like, okay, what's being done to sort of make us or put us in this position where we are impacted every single day. We are silenced, or we are expected to be resilient, but not in a healthy way, in almost like a toxic, crushing way. And I don't think that's healthy. And so with everything, I think it's connected physically, mentally. It all just comes together.
I really love that. And I love the fact that you analyze these psychosocial factors as being directly relevant to the quality of women's health.
Mm,
Because I think a lot of people will reduce a woman's experience to one thing and not understand the intersectionality and how it affects every other sphere of your life.
right, right.
So I would love to get your take on maybe women in the workplace, because I think that women spend a lot of time at work. We know that obviously with the women's rights movement, there was a push for women to enter the workplace. And I ask this because you had said, women are expected to push and be resilient, even when it's to our own detriment. So I'd love to get your view on maybe how you think women in entering and currently navigating the workplace What's your view on that? Maybe from a health perspective. I don't know if you want to do from a rights perspective,
Right.
whichever perspective you would like to address it from.
The funny thing when I say um, we're just constantly expected to push through and, we shouldn't, and that it's like, toxic, sometimes people take that in a negative way. And for me, I'm like, no, I'm not saying that we cannot do these things because there are people in leadership, executive positions who are struggling with, say, endometriosis, who are achieving their goals, who are struggling with their mental health, who are, getting these things done. Um, and in the midst of that, the pushing through has been almost normalized for women. And to some extent, it's not healthy and it's not making excuses that, like, oh, you're lazy, you just don't want to show up. No, it's not that. We're fully capable of these things, but at times it's at our detriment because then we're not listened to and we put our health on the line, and the cost is way bigger than that. So with women in the workplace, um I think there needs to be some kind of balance, because again, we're able to do so much, we're amazing. um However, you'll find you go to your HR manager, they do not understand. And this is from people I've spoken to almost on a regular, and they say, I think I'm going to lose my job because they don't understand that I would like to take time off. Because, say, for example, with endometriosis, you're in so much pain, you either need so many painkillers or heavy painkillers that you're most likely drowsy, you're not able to be productive. You need time off to either go to the doctor to be seen. It's unpredictable because you might be spotting or have this heavy flow that I can't be in the office right now. And again, that's not to say we're not capable or able to do the job well, but they aren't a lot of workplaces that cater for our needs. So whether that is the emotional aspect, the physical aspect, we generally tend to then, I'm just going to keep quiet and keep pushing. And so for me, the issue is, I think that the space needs to be that I can speak about this and be open about it, um, and be allowed. Because I find that when you're present and you're not as productive as you need to be, but you're present, that then becomes a problem. And if I'm not mistaken, some of the statistics say presenteeism is more of a teism. And sometimes people think that, no, because you were there, you were in the office, you're in the workplace, you're fine, you're taking off. But you can be there and not functioning the way you need to, or you'd rather go home, take care of yourself. You come back when you're good and you can hit all your goals. So there's just no, or not as many accommodations, or very few recognizing the things that we go through as women.
Thank you for sharing. I wonder. Okay, I think let's segue into the menstrual leave policy, right? Because I
Okay.
know that a lot of countries are currently looking at implementing this menstrual health policy at a governmental level. Because I think
Mhm.
to date, many organizations have had autonomy over the issue, but in their own capacity. It wasn't something that was regulated and then formally institutionalized, codified, and now this is coming from like at a governmental level. What is your view on having a menstrual policy being implemented into both public and private sector?
Very important. I think it is essential. So I can't speak about this without going into, what is being done in South Africa and what the activists, over 31 activists, researchers, um, people in public, private, who have come together to, I would say, to implement, a menstrual health rights bill. And what that would entail is to say that menstrual health is a right, is a human right, and then a few things, would fall under that. So menstrual leave, access to safe and free products, clean water, sanitation, and recognizing conditions like endometriosis, adenomyosis, PCOS, and fibroids, and just making accommodations for this. It's more of like a human rights issue. So to have that in place. And so this is very important because then it can also addresses period poverty where girls don't have to miss school because they don't have access or can't afford. People like me who struggle with these conditions can take the day off, not worry about the stigma, shame. Hopefully, we'll get there eventually. But it's incorporated into society, into the workplace, and you tackle a few issues. The adequate infrastructure just in this menstrual health bill. So it's extremely important for society. No one should be missing school because they can't or don't have access to pads, or sometimes there's like a ripple effect, so you end up finding the girls that don't have access maybe might use something else, then comes health risks, then comes other issues, or the emotional impact and the shame. It's just, it would be good for society, and I think it's important to recognize it as a human right because it is.
Why do you think perhaps menstrual cycles have been dehumanized for so long? Because for me, it's interesting that at a time where women are actually leaving the workforce at the highest rate in history, is the time where these things are now being codified in law. I find that very interesting, but also very convenient that now you want to cater for the woman who may not necessarily be in the workforce, like if we're looking in the next 30 years, you know. What does that mean for the previous 30 years where women were in the workplace and struggling with all of this? And I know that there's many cases. There's one in the UK of a lady who worked at a managing consulting firm who had an onwards upwards culture. She struggled with endometriosis, and she obviously tried to reason with the company and have them understand like what she goes through on a monthly basis. They couldn't understand, and let's be honest, most of these workplaces in management, it's men. So it's also the uncomfortability of having to explain to to a man, not just another human, but a man, what exactly you're going through, and them maybe not having the capacity to understand. Then coupled with these laws, which are being written by, we can assume, men who may not necessarily understand, do you think we can rely on the comprehensiveness and the quality of these laws?
The crazy thing is that you'd be surprised how many women actually don't support this as well. That's been for me one of the most shocking things. I thought it would be a no-brainer that every woman supports this. Every woman is on board, including ones that suffer with endometriosis or may have had an experience where they maybe dealt with some kind of period poverty. It's surprising because of, I think, that internalized or deep rooted stigma and resilience that I was talking about before, where it's like, but it's just your period. Or, yeah, I mean, if you don't have access to a pad, yeah, make a plan. There's like this deep rooted issue that maybe people still don't recognize, which is what we're trying to break, what we're trying to unlearn. And that comes from whether it's um, labeling periods, menstrual health, all of these conversations as you need to keep that on hush, or you don't talk about it, or I mean, if there's any issue in any of those uh, fields, well, you kind of you make a plan. You're a woman. Don't involve men. Um, and so even when it comes to men, because of that, because we haven't fully broken that stigma, they maybe will not fully understand. However, on the other side, there are plenty of men who are allies, who are understanding, some who have, if they are in leadership positions, implemented workplace policies to accommodate women who need a day off for their menstrual period, who deal with endometriosis, PCOS, those things. So there are people that say, "Oh, at my job, my boss is cool with it," or the HR said it's fine, and I was very transparent about it. So it's like, okay, there's an organization where the government doesn't really hasn't implemented it fully yet, but individuals are saying, okay, well, here at this place, we're gonna cater to them. So there, it's it's tricky because you just we need to keep communicating, breaking the stigma and shame, and educating people. But we can only trust it if we get people that will listen and that are open to having these conversations, whether they're old, young, men, women, because it's people from all walks of life that may not support it and don't understand what we're doing. On the other end, there are plenty from different walks of life. They're like, oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense. Cool, let's do it. So it's a tricky one, and it just takes pushing a little bit more, educating a little bit more, and I think eventually we'll get there. But not everyone's going to be on board. That's just the truth. But this is something important for society. I think eventually people will get on board along the way. Sometimes they need to see it working and functioning before they can fully believe. You know what I mean?
You said an interesting point when you spoke about it will come down to a particular organization, particular management, because I think my previous podcast guest had said the state of women's rights and equality is a direct reflection of the leadership of any organization.
Mm,
And I think that in circumstances like this, for if I was a young woman possibly evaluating which workplaces to go in, these are things I would be looking at. Like, how are these things being handled? Because you can't be naive and think if they aren't, if these issues are not at the forefront of that workplace, they will accommodate you if they've shown that they don't really care. And I don't know as a lack of not caring. I know that that's harsh to say because people are balancing profit and people. And I think when you balance profit and people, it's never easy. But I would love to explore with you, do you think women, by they with their natural attributes, femininity, should they be in the workplace? Because I think for the woman in your case who are probably disagreeing with this, it's the feminists who fought really hard to be in the workplace and believe that women can do everything that men can do, including like shedding their uterus and going to board meetings and being punched in your uterus and still showing up as if everything is fine. What is your view on perhaps the place of women in the workplace?
I will say yes, women are meant to be in the workplace. Um, we're amazing. We can do whatever we put our minds to. I read something not too long ago when I was first just putting together this petition to implement menstrual leave, right? And some of the stats say that presenteeism is more prevalent than absenteeism. So you'll find people showing up, taking off the register, but not productive, not doing anything. But you've checked the box. I came to work. I'm here. Still dealing with either their mental issues, burnout, physically not there, able to produce anything, whilst someone who was able to take the day off, coming back recharged and able to tackle all the things that they needed to do. So they say that people who show up but aren't really there um, is tends to be more prevalent, right? And I think anyone that does want to be in the workplace should be, and women who deal with these things, menstruators, can tackle any and everything. It just so happens that sometimes people struggle with conditions like endometriosis, fibroids, PCOS, adenomyosis, that actually literally it's so debilitating that you find yourself, if you are at home on the couch for 12 hours. I've literally laid down, not able to move for 12 hours. However, I think I'm fully capable of being in a position where I'm leading a team, I'm talking to people, I'm in heels, I'm standing, I'm running the board meeting. And sometimes, I know they say, oh, but women are so emotional, they're so soft. And I mean, if that's going to be the case, then don't hire, women for these leadership roles. And it's like, no, then the issue comes in where, because that's the mindset, the thinking that, well, if we hire women, they're going to just go off on their period. They say also in studies that most likely people aren't going to take this because they don't want to be seen as weak, or the shame of like, oh, someone took time off because they were on their period. We haven't done the unlearning of that shame, and so if just some accommodations are put in place for those really crippling conditions, they could see that, oh, okay, if on a day when I'm on my period and I need to be home, I can work from home. It's just that the workplace doesn't accommodate for me to put my heating pad, to have flat shoes on, to maybe wear something loose fitting. We need to be together. We need to show up. And at the end of the day, when I get home, I end up crashing. So that doesn't mean we shouldn't or don't belong in the workplace. The same way that you're going to have some wheelchair accessibility, including people who menstruate, who use wheelchairs and stuff like that, you have accommodations for them. I think it's a similar thing, because something like endometriosis is, for some people, a dynamic disability. You have people walking with a cane. You have someone who's just stuck for maybe sometimes a particular period of time, day, and just needs a certain kind of flexibility in the workplace to be able to um, yeah, to just achieve their goals, if that makes sense. So we're fully capable. We see people who are athletes, people who are in government, all kinds of people who, if you don't ask them, you wouldn't know, right? But that's because they shouldn't necessarily have to just constantly pretend to push through and stuff. And I know life is life, the world is the world, nobody waits for you. But some accommodations, I believe, would make the system, the world, a slightly better place for everyone.
I absolutely agree with you, and I think I'm just going to briefly touch on the University of Free State, excuse me, article and what came out, the results that came out from it. But we've just heard that panty liners and all sorts of sanitary products in South Africa have contain endocrine disruptors,
Yep.
right? So to my mind, you've had a whole cohort of women. We don't know how long this has been happening, and this is worldwide. I think that the University of Free State is probably just ahead of its time for actually doing this research.
Mm.
They've all worn these products, and this has led to the increase of, I think, conditions like PCOS, endometriosis, and so on and so forth. Now, I think workplaces will look at it and think, is it not just more reliable to hire a man? Because now I need to understand all of these other things that historically I never really had to understand. Because I mean, I come from a banking and finance background. it's similar to your management consulting, high pressure environments. I look at it and I'm like, there's no way that that kind of environment will wait and stop for somebody who requires an accommodation. I think in that circumstance, they would just say, you know what, Buntle, we sympathize with the situation. However, because of how we generate business and do business here, your condition doesn't suit. So how do we now address this I guess conversation from that perspective? Because what I think is now going to happen is that women are now going to be siloed or pigeonholed into certain roles where accommodations can be made, and then excluded from other roles where accommodations cannot be made.
You know, funny enough, with this petition of trying to implement menstrual leave, right, I've had some very interesting encounters, and I faced, a very similar question. And I I just thought to myself that, you know what, if you don't want to have someone in an organization because you're like, I'm going to lose money in my business, let me not have these people. Then they're an asset. At least that's how I look at it. They're an asset and they're making a lot of money. Okay. For them to be so valuable that you're like, yeah, I'm losing business. If this person takes a day off, my company is shutting down. You know what I mean? So that for me, that's how I looked at it. But I'm just like, I see that that's discrimination. I didn't choose to deal with this, the same way that we would be understanding about other conditions, most likely. I I still struggle to understand why some of these conditions like fibroids, um, are not seen with the same weight. So if I tell you, I come to you, and again, not to put them in the same box, but if I say I am chronically ill, okay. However, if I tell you, you wouldn't know, okay. If I didn't put it out there and say I'm dealing with a chronic illness, you wouldn't know, and I'd be able to get everything done. But because now I've made it, the information open to you, all of a sudden the perception changes or something like that. So my thing is I believe that is discrimination, um, over something that we cannot control, we did not choose, and this happens every single month. And I believe, if at least what some people also tend to believe, if men were menstruating every month, we'd have a national day every month. So there's just accommodation sometimes when it's a different group of people, or um, men. And so I think that would be discriminating, and I don't think that's fair. I think we're, again, as I've mentioned before, we're perfectly capable of showing up. We're forced to sometimes, in pain or not. Some people are like, oh, just take the painkillers and go, get surgery and go. But that's the issue. For some people, the issue is that painkillers don't work, surgery doesn't work. It's not sufficient enough. A condition like endometriosis does not have a cure. What then? But I still need to show up for work and do what I need to do. And I don't think they need to be discriminated against.
It's so funny that you mentioned that if this was impacting men, it would be a national day. Because I have seen a few comments that if the shoe was on the other foot, we would have seen laws passed by now, many more accommodations, and we're just not getting the same traction because of the group that it's impacting.
Right. Like pain is so normalized for women. Like we're generally expected to take pain more. It's part of being a woman. So yeah, you get up, you be a Bogoto, and you fight, you push through, because that is our brand, especially African women. That is us. Like, we're so, and yes, we are, but now it's almost to a point where it's not healthy, not sustainable. um And therefore the cycle continues because you find us pushing through, and maybe just that one day off could have been being the difference between me in the hospital on the weekend or not, you know.
Yeah. I think the disturbing thing for me, and in this conversation with you, which has been so enlightening because you're at the forefront of the policy, is I think we are getting to a point where women will have to choose between making a living and their health. That's where I see this going because the conditions that you've listed are just a category of the health issues that women are dealing with. It's a broad spectrum. And I mean, the woman that I've spoken to throughout the journey, up until your perimenopause, menopause, it really doesn't get any better. Because women's health has been under researched and underfunded, women have been silent for very long. There's a lot of conditions that are impacting women that we actually don't know about, right? This coming to the forefront is because of women like yourself making it an issue and using your voice to make sure that these conversations are constantly at the front. But at the same time, there are people, and as you say, it's women. And that's my, I don't want to say disdain for like women empowerment, but that's one of the things I don't like about women empowerment is because women empowerment would be very progressive if all women were on the same page. The problem is in many of these women issues, we know that men are already not on the same page as us. You have your feminist men who obviously see it from a logical perspective, and I think that's where we're going now, where productivity is being impacted by people's health. So they've had to start looking at the research and like why people aren't well. But then you've got women who will just I pushed through when I was your age. I don't see why you shouldn't. And it's that toxic mentality that now we're
Right,
going to end up
right.
perpetuating the cycle. Whereas there's other women who are thinking, no, I pushed through. I don't want the next generation to push through. So that's what makes the battle quite difficult.
Yeah, it's so tough. And you mentioned something about choosing between working and um sorry, I might not quote you properly, but just choosing between the two. I'm thinking to myself that the systems already exist that we may have to choose between the two already. So my condition on its own, outside of the workplace, I have to choose because of how my condition is. I'm going to the hospital every so often. I'm losing money. Medical aid funds are done before it's March. Um, I'm I'm seeing a specialist. I'm getting the medication. All of these things. My salary is maybe potentially not enough to cover that. I have a family to take care of, so I end up having to choose. Gonna be in pain versus buying bread. I have to buy bread, and then and this is from a place maybe of privilege. Now, what more? Somebody who you really have to choose between bread and a pad, for example, or bread and seeing a doctor because you're in excruciating pain all the time. These things are already in place. So now, when it comes to say the workplace, if there was accommodations, again, it would make it easier to be able to navigate life, the world, and you can see if someone is contributing to your organization, fine. But there are men who don't have these conditions who are not contributing to the same level. And again, this is not a man woman thing. Like, it's just sometimes it's really simplified, and it usually comes down to it's just a bad period. Just take painkillers. And for me, the message is really that it's because it's not just a bad period. It's not just getting some pads. No, there are deeper issues where some really don't have access, cannot afford. So the systems in place, you already have to choose between this option versus this option. And the element of making menstrual health a human right That's where it comes in, because it is a right. You bring back people's dignity. You only bring back people's. You not only bring back people's dignity, but you you're able to allow to create like a functioning system. Again, as I mentioned, it's, the menstrual health rights bill, free products, safe products, clean water sanitation, recognizing conditions like endometriosis, fibroids, adenomyosis, PCOS, and I know I'm going to keep repeating these, but it's because people just think, oh, you're just on your period, and it's not that. It's so much bigger, and there's so much more to it. So no one should have to choose. Unfortunately, conditions that, where people struggle with crippling pain, they sometimes have to choose. And some people have lost their jobs because they really couldn't show up. And it's not because they're not capable or good enough. They're dealing with a condition the same way if someone had any other chronic illness. Um, you would understand that, okay, they had to take medical leave. Unfortunately, conditions that are, I don't want to say are reproductive conditions, because they're not, they whole body conditions but related to reproductive health, they just aren't seen with the same weight, and that's how it ends up getting dismissed, or people don't see the importance of it.
But I think the issue that we have is who decides what's important,
Mm,
right? Because in my view, I think these conversations, and if I was an employee having a woman manager, but it could go either way, because even now I'm just thinking about it in real time and talking, I'm thinking out loud, and I'm like thinking, you may think as a female having a woman manager would probably make things easier for you if you have these conditions, but you may find yourself with an extremist female manager who believes you should be able to power through and then would deem you weak,
right.
and then you're not able to basically contribute to the gender equality movement, because here you are, Bontle, we fought so hard to be in the workplace, and then there you go, taking every day off because you can't be here, you can't function. So it's so difficult, because I think we trust custodians of leadership to understand everybody, but when it comes to these conditions, it's interesting when you mentioned it's not just a bad period, and that we need to evaluate the underlying issues and factors. And I would love to unpack that a bit more with you, because I think you had mentioned that people will say to you, oh, just take some pills. So let's discuss a bit more about the underlying factors that contribute to these conditions. And I love the fact that you said it's not reproductive, because it's actually hormonal, and that's something that a lot of people don't know. I think a lot of people again miscategorize these conditions and say it's reproductive, whereas it's not. It's hormonal, and the law is not is also, it doesn't legislate for hormonal imbalances. There isn't anything that I've seen on paper that actually speaks to what it is. So the miscategorization, or even the fact that it's absent, is also part of the problem. Can you talk to us a little bit more about like how these conditions arise, maybe mind body connection, and also looping in the what we use to mitigate and then alleviate as well?
So I think before I go into that, I will just respond that it's not that, women are weak. um it's it's that pain is so normalized, and pain is not normal. It's not normal to live that way, or have even an excruciating period. So just for people to understand that, first and foremost, pain's not normal. That So somebody wanting to take a day off, it's because it's not normal. It's not okay. If you had a nosebleed and you're bleeding out of your nose all the time, I'm pretty sure people would be concerned. But if over 200 million around the world were bleeding from their nose all the time, and it was women, it would be like, just put something up your nose. But you're not meant to be bleeding from your nose all the time, So
Yeah.
that, just to address that, it's because we just normalized pain so much. But going back to what you were saying, so you had asked what are the underlying like symptoms, like
Yeah.
what you know comes with it. It's beyond just a hormonal thing. It it's so many things. And I'm trying to think of the best way I can address this because it's so broad, because it can be the impact with hormones. And this is, again, I'm not like a specialist or anything. I have my experience, what I've felt speaking to other people as well on the ground. And so this is just to cover roughly just endometriosis, PCOS, fibroids, adenomyosis. And I usually mention those is because like some of the symptoms are connected or linked in some way. But that's not to say that they are the same. And even having the same diagnosis will not manifest the same way for everyone. The different stages for endometriosis will not look like the same thing in everyone's body. So that's something people need to remember, that for me, I might have endometriosis, but I might be a diabetic. So now I'm dealing with something else. I might have PCOS, but I also have thyroid, so we have to navigate things individually. But just in the broad sense, um, sometimes it's an inflammation thing, and sometimes what causes those things it can be what you eat, it can be stress. And for me, that used to be really patronizing when a doctor would be like, yeah, don't stress so much. It still kind of is, but I now understand it in terms of like your cortisol levels and what impact that has on you. And so I try to
Mhm.
see it like, okay, fine, I'm gonna take it that way, not just like, oh, just be positive. No, that's really patronizing. But in terms of like the actual like hormones and what certain how they may impact me, that can aggravate my symptoms. Um, Honestly, the things all around us sometimes that I may not know or be picking up on, whether it's hair products, cleaning products, I don't know. But at the same time, you can be doing everything right. And I mean that you can do everything right. You can take your walks, you can eat your anti inflammatory diet, you can remove mold from your house, you can do everything right. And sometimes you will still be in pain. You can have surgery, it can come back. They've said endometriosis cells behave like cancer cells. Um, it can spread to different parts of the body. I've heard people complain that their gums when they have an endometriosis flare up. And this is someone you're like, oh, but it's your womb. No, it's beyond that. It's so much more than that. And when I say it's a whole body disease beyond just the hormones, um, it's leg pain, back pain, the mental, emotional. There's PMDD that people don't speak about, where sometimes people literally want to take their own lives during that period leading up to their period. That's outside of their control. It's not because it's just so hard. I'm so sad. My period's coming. No, this is something happening. I don't know the science or the medical terms for it, but neurologically, your hormones, like you're saying, these things are out of balance, and it's affecting so many parts of the body. And we're just told to take painkillers or sleep it off, get surgery. But all of these things that are supposed to help may not help. They might give some relief, but sometimes the things that give relief may lead to further complications. So for me, where I'm at, if I take painkillers every day, it's potentially causing something else in my body. You know what I mean? It's just not sustainable, especially for something like endometriosis. There's no cure. For PCOS, I was only diagnosed a year ago, and it's been a roller coaster. You know what I mean? So, what more someone who You have to show up. And again, this is not to make excuses because we're fully capable of showing up, doing what we need to. There are plenty of women who are in these leadership positions who are taking over the world, dealing with these things. But again, the message should be that pain should not be normal because there are accommodations for anyone else who is perhaps dealing with something as crippling, or it would be alarming if you saw it on someone else or as something else, you know.
Yeah, it sounds just so awful, and like I think because it's a vicious cycle, it's very hard to pinpoint what exactly is the catalyst and then what exacerbates, because it just seems like one thing impacts another. And I think that the studies are showing that there's an increase or a rise in the number of women that are experiencing all of these conditions. So I think that this is why this is something that has to now become a topic of conversation in the mainstream.
Yeah.
But I think about how, they might, a hiring manager who's a male may hear about all of this and think like, you know what, it's too messy. I don't necessarily want to do the work to understand this, because I think this requires a lot of understanding. The fact when you, excuse me, when you're explaining it to me, there's a lot of ambiguity. It seems like you need to be very agile in your thinking and adjust like how you view this condition. And for men who are, I mean, I don't know, are they logical? Because again, these statements that women are emotional, men are logical, I don't know if I necessarily believe in those divisive statements. But from a logical perspective, trying to understand something that is not fully understood, fully researched, and is evolving, it might be too difficult. And then we will get to a point where hiring managers will lean towards hiring males because it's more predictable. They don't have the same emotional body, they don't have the same hormonal irregulation. And there's actually a reel that I saw on Instagram. It's from the 1950s in America, and this older guy is saying, women go through all of these menstrual cycles and conditions on a monthly basis. This is why women cannot be in leadership or being lawmakers, or because being trusted with anything of significance, because they will do whatever they're doing based on how they're feeling. And if how they're feeling is constantly fluctuating, we can't trust it. So I wonder, what is your view on that kind of thinking? As extreme as it is, we know that there are men and women who do think like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's quite flawed because, I mean, look at the material. And I know Candace, the minister of menstruation, she'll say that, menstrual leave, for example, it's not a new concept. It's dated back, if I'm not mistaken, to like 1920. And from that time till now, look at the material. We haven't stopped being menstruators, or we didn't just start being menstruators. And look at all that we've been able to achieve. We've had movements led by women. We've had history made led by women, organizations being run led by women. And I don't think part of the criteria is like, so do you menstruate? Do you have endometriosis? But it just continues a cycle because there are some who may not disclose, and understandably so, because they don't want to be viewed a certain way. And so that then continues the stigma, the shame, where with someone like me, I'm trying to speak about it in these spaces. If you go to my LinkedIn, you see that I'm being open about it because it's important to break through into these places. My dad is was in HR for maybe over 20 years, and he said, you know what, I shared this video with some people at work, and two women came to me saying they have this condition. They were afraid to speak up about it, there was some shame, there was some stigma, but it's just, obviously you won't be fortunate to have someone like my dad who has seen it. He's seen it with my
Mm,
mom, he's seen it with me.
mm.
He's a little bit more understanding when it comes to, these women's health issues. And it's not giving people a pass, but it's to say have some compassion for something that someone actually doesn't control. you know um we can give grace, and people are like, oh well, just take regular leave or whatever the case is. But for me, I would say, look at the material, look at everything we've been able to achieve, and a day off, access to safe, free products, adequate infrastructure, clean water, sanitation, that benefits everybody. It it i i personally believe it doesn't take away. And again, this is to say, any company, organization has free will to hire whoever they want to, which is fine. That will just then push us to then work together, to build empires together, understanding each other and what we go through, who are on this journey, who are in this movement, and it's not going to stop us. It's just wanting to be accommodated the same way we've been able to do for so many other different things. And if we talk about inclusivity, why can't that be added to the conversation in different organizations?
I think you made a valid point about women being pushed into the margins, and I think what would begin as the margins will then become the majority because women are now half the population. So, in as much as we have been asking for inclusion and access and accommodation and dignity just to be seen, I think women are also getting tired and realizing at what cost are we going to keep asking for this inclusion, because this inclusion has never really been genuine. In my opinion, when I look at it from the Beijing conference, I think it was okay, let's let them in and see what happens. But I don't think that they genuinely believe that women would be as successful as what they were in the workplace. I don't think that they did think that women would be the competent leaders that they were. But I love what you said about when you study history, you can see women's competence in delivering justice in so many spaces and working in so many key positions and all the milestones. But I think there's a tendency in society to always focus on what's not working because it's easy, than to focus on like all the wins and all the good things and all the attributes. And that's what I always love to say about femininity. It's a concept that people have made into something that it's not. Feminine characteristics are at their core, you being a creator because we create life. So women actually are the creatives. So a lot of these industries are being stifled right now because they don't have that creative energy. You cannot just have masculine energy in an organization. There will be no creation, nothing new. Men will come into something and not think, how can I iterate this? That's not their mindset. It's women who will come into a house and think, I'm going to change the curtains. Actually, I'm going to move this here. We are the creative engine. But because we've been talked down for so long, I think women don't believe in themselves anymore. And many of them just want to replicate masculine traits because those are the traits that appear to be winning.
I mean, funny enough, something I read recently, I can't even remember what it was from, but they were saying the issue is that with wanting to be equal and this equality, we've made men the standard, like the highest standard of what we want to be like and compete against and just stand next to. And I don't think it has to be that way. I think we're all wired differently. There are women who are slightly different when it comes to, let's take strength. There are some freakishly strong women. Um, the same way that there may be very nurturing men. I think we need to work with how we're wired, and not continue this like competition thing. So in wanting to be equal, I think it's wanting to be seen for sure, but working in the space that we have. And I mean, being from SA, I recently spoke about this. We can't heal or be in isolation. That's literally like going against Ubuntu. I am because we are.
Yeah.
We are interconnected. We have our relationships and our healing policies rely on community. So even when the systems fail, you would think you can go to the next person next door. Um, but again, unfortunately, it's not that way. Um, I just yeah, it's such a it's such a tough one. It breaks my heart when people don't fully get it or understand or want to embrace it, because again you find that, oh, there are people who are dealing with this but may not want to be open or talk about it because of the fear that, well, I might lose my job, or I won't be seen or respected a certain way, so let me not. And then again, some who, because of this internalized normalization of pain and pushing through, it's like, I mean, you just do what you need to do as a woman. And then that continues, and the work becomes harder, and we have to just, just keep pushing and pushing. And so it's a tough one. Yeah, it's a tough one.
I love what you've said about men being the standard because I think, you know, what categorizes or classifies as a good woman is a woman who's able to endure an excruciating amount of pain. So we have to start there because why do we view good women as women who have been able to absorb and endure? That's the problem, that attitude that we've upheld for a very long time. And women, obviously, we are co-opters to that narrative because we do, in many circumstances, uphold that resilience. As you say, that Mbogoto attitude, we uphold it, right? But I feel it's very difficult when you come down from that pedestal that society has placed on you because then you get demonized. And with the way society currently is now, it is so divisive and everything is becoming, it's either you're supporting one thing or another thing. And if you don't support the one thing, it means you're for another thing. Nobody wants to explore the nuance anymore.
Mm,
Nobody believes that multiple truths can exist because
right.
that's the reality of the situation. Multiple truths can exist. Bontle can be somebody struggling with endometriosis who happens to be a female manager who's competent and good at
Right.
the job. But because people want to say it cannot be, this is where we lend ourselves, where there's just these polarizing narratives.
Yes.
So I think the onus is on everyone in this space to keep perpetuating multiple truths can exist
Yeah.
and we need to explore the nuance. But us exploring the nuance requires us to tap back into our humanity because unfortunately we become so robotic that we just want things that are simple to understand. So that's why I make that example of a hiring manager. If I have two candidates and Guntle is saying on her resume, suffers from endometriosis, may require leave from time to time, and then I have Sipo who's like always available, I'm gonna pick him. And that's just there's a lot of work that needs to be done with people's biases. And it's like you say, there's very few people who have a manager like your dad who's had that lived experience of a woman in close proximity to him who have suffered from that condition. So he understands this doesn't make you less competent. It's not something that you chose. It has happened to you. So he would most likely be willing to give you a chance for that position. But we have such a long way to go, I think, in deconstructing masculinity because once we can deconstruct what masculinity is, everything else I think will become better.
Right. And I mean, I think it stems from, a few things. It could be cultural background where we don't speak about certain things, where um, it's not good to speak about what's going on with your womb or your period. Your identity is in your ability to produce children. It could be Christianity or just faith, where again the stigma comes from there, and you know being viewed a certain way then adds goes back to that cycle. Then it's like, well, then I don't want to speak about it. That means now I'm going to continue the cycle of not speaking about it, and then we have us not healing because this one's aunt and this one's grandmother this one didn't speak about it. This one in the workplace refused to talk about it, but you could kind of identify it, and then passing it on, the silence continues and we do not heal. And then that also, not leaving it on us, because there are obviously systems that need to be in place in order for us to heal, but in part of healing, us not speaking about it or being open about what we've gone through or the ones before us went through, we find that we don't heal. It's delayed diagnosis because you don't investigate, because you think this pain is normal. I need to push through. I'm not going to the doctor. What? I'll just take something for it. So you have less people finding out what's happening, and then the stats are not accurate. Research then doesn't get the funding. It's just this loop and cycle because we are not open, we're not having conversations, there is shame, all of those things. I think it's just connected, and the cycle never ends for us who are dealing with it generally, because it's throughout the entire month, but then the cycle never ends because we don't speak up. And again, sometimes when I think about it, because obviously to me in my mind I have a conviction, I believe what I believe. And so when I think, if two candidates are there outside of what I'm dealing with, because Sipo could have, I don't know, hypertension, he's a diabetic, but we'll have accommodations if Sipo needs to go to the doctor, because we recognize we're a little bit more familiar with those things, and we understand that Sipo didn't choose that. But when me, Bontle, wants to apply and I say, no, I have endometriosis, I applied because I believe I am capable. Will I need to go to the doctor sometimes? Potentially. I'm not going to make excuses, because I know that the world is the world. Nobody's gonna wait for you. It's capitalism, all of these things. We need to show up. So I will do what I am able to do. But like you said, we struggle with that two things can exist. Sometimes I will not have control of the pain I'm in. I just won't. The same way that if a car hits you one day, you had no control and you needed to call for a day off. I'm not saying it's the same thing, but because this is my everyday lived experience, I'm not calling for a day off every day. And I think that's the fear. People think, hey, people with condition or menstruators, they're just gonna every month, every. The truth is, I don't believe that that's what it would be. There are some people who, again, like I'm saying, for some it is a dynamic disability, although something like endometriosis isn't recognized as a disability. There are some who fall in that category that may need to work remotely, may need to show up a little bit differently in the world. But even in that situation, there should be things in place. And again, every company hiring manager has free will, they can do as they please. But I think part of that inclusivity and equity is hiring someone who is a menstruator and may potentially have these conditions. And yeah, I think it's moving forward. It's being progressive. I think if you recognize as a company that we don't control it, you know.
Bontle, thank you so much for sharing. I think we have to have you back because this is such an intersectional topic we could have actually spoken about more things, but in the interest of the conversation, I was like, let me try and focus on certain points that could make the conversation valuable in the time that we had. Where can people find you? What are you up to next? And what kind of support do you need to rally from the people that are on your side?
Yeah, so I mean, I just want to say thank you for the conversation, and the space to speak about something so important and so important to my heart. But people can find me on Instagram mainly at endometriosis ZA. I have a little baby that I am going to be launching soon, and that is the Heal Endo movement. Um, Although I am, from South Africa, the goal is to make it a worldwide movement, focusing on obviously the African continent, but going beyond just trying to have people heal endo, have safe spaces to speak about endometriosis. But that is inclusive of endometriosis, fibroids, adenomyosis, PCOS, because these are things that I've lived with, struggled with, and I'm currently working on a little bit of a series called Endometriosis Unfiltered on YouTube. So at Bontle_M, you can find me. And yeah, that's pretty much me for now.
Amazing. I'm going to make sure that that is included in the description of this podcast so that people can click and see. I'm very excited about healing endo because when you mention what you mentioned, I'm like, I'm already in my mind saying synergy. Yay, excited for that.
Yeah.
But I just want to echo again, thank you so much for just sharing your vulnerability. I mean, I can see that you're pulling this from a very deep place. And it also took a lot for me to keep it together while listening because I can feel where it's coming from. But I really just appreciate you candidly sharing. And I know that this is going to help someone because women are not well. And
Mm,
as I always say, until all women are well, none of us are well.
yeah. Yeah, that is powerful. I think that that is a good note to end on. And this was healing for me. The work that I do is not just for me, but just to touch other people's lives so that they can find healing as well. So, thank you just for the space. The Lantern podcast has been a light to me too. So I appreciate you.
Bless. Thank you, Bontle. Thank you, everyone, for listening. And we'll see you on the next one.